A man kneels and asks men who are touching swords in a store without permission to stop. The main one hits the seller in the stomach. He asks the shopkeeper not to think badly of them. This is just research. The stranger told him that the local merchants are connected with bandits. He asked to look at the sword he had in his hand. The man noticed that the sword looked like the one of the bandit who was caught the other day. The owner, wincing in pain, asked if it was an ordinary sword like those sold everywhere. The city residents who passed by recognized the Knights of the Order and ran away in all directions. And the owner of the store explains that an honest seller has no benefit in dealing with bandits. He suggested that they check not him, but that guy outside the walls. That suspicious blacksmith. The chief among the knights asked again about the strange blacksmith. The man confirmed everything. He goes on to explain that the blacksmiths outside the city walls are not members of the trade association. They are the kind of people you can shake something out of if you give them a little thrashing. This blacksmith always makes swords alone in complete silence and is generally a creepy guy. His name is Lutz. The commander thought about it. The owner didn't let up. He kept saying that the main character was suspicious. He hadn't registered with the guild, so he was probably doing something behind their backs. The knight agreed, but still ordered the store owner to be sent to the guardhouse on suspicion of smuggling weapons with the bandits. He called him one of those bad people who rat on their colleagues. They'll shake some money out of him and give him a dressing down. Another knight asked his comrade what they would do about that suspicious blacksmith. He replied that there was no point in even trying. He couldn't smell money. And what about touching a blacksmith behind the walls? He assumed that most likely it was a third-rate blacksmith with limited skills. He had nothing to sell wholesale. Lutz was forging weapons at that time. He struck the hot metal with a hammer, giving it the shape of a sword. This story began with an unknown blacksmith. The young man is working hard. His face is extremely concentrated. This is a story about a man enchanted by a strange sword. This sword will travel around the world in different eras. An old man rubs his beard, and a young girl smiles. This sword will drive a lot of people crazy. Lutz opened his mouth in surprise and said that everything was ready. He looks at the sword carefully. He thinks that although it is far from the desired result, he has fully completed the manufacture of the sword. A young blacksmith named Lutz took an apple, tossed it up, and placed the sword he had just created under it. This was done to test the sharpness of the sword. The apple was easily cut in half. Lutz didn't realize how sharp this sword was. He didn't even feel the weight of the apple when it was cut. It was incomparable. He noted the beauty of this sword. Even though it was a weapon for killing people, the hero did not understand why it was so beautiful. This weapon catches the eye. Suddenly, a silhouette of a girl appeared in the reflection of the sword. Suddenly, the most beautiful girl in the world appeared in front of the guy. She stretched her hands towards the guy, took his face, and wanted to kiss him. However, the next moment, the girl became a sword. The main character fell to the floor and knocked over the table with the basket of apples on it. He didn't understand what he was doing. Lutz placed the sword on a special stand and covered it with a cloth. He sat down on the chair opposite the weapon and exhaled. He assumed that he had done something unusual. He did not understand what was wrong with the sword. An ordinary blacksmith would gladly sell it. They would certainly pay a lot for it, but he would not be sorry to sell it because he is not a member of the guild. And if he decides to sell it to someone, he will be immediately shown the door. And if it is considered stolen, you could end up in prison. And if you send him along with the bandits, they might confiscate him. There must be another way. The hero doesn't understand what to do, or asks what he should do with this sword. Suddenly, someone opened the door to the guy's house and asked how he was doing. Lutz jumped in surprise. It was a girl named Claudia. The young man asked her to knock before going in, and he noticed that she was absolutely tactless. The girl who ruins her beauty with her talk, Claudia. She is a curious stealer who does not just buy things from blacksmiths, and the hero doesn't have many customers. The young man told the girl that he was done with the orders so she could rummage around as much as she wanted. The girl stroked the guy's head and said that she was just in time. He probably had something convenient to try. Claudia began to swing the axe. Upon closer inspection, she said that it turned out well. Lutz noted that she was very attentive to quality. The girl said that she was taking all the axes that the guy had. She asked him to help her load it all into the cart. He got indignant and asked why he should. She didn't let him finish and said that she was a fragile girl. He didn't want to make her load 20 heavy axes herself. The guy banged on the table and remarked that Claudia was an unpleasant lady. She, in turn, noticed the sword, which was covered with cloth. She approached the guy and asked if this was his new creation. Lutz pushed it aside and said that it was not for sale. She replied that the question of whether it was for sale or not should first be decided in negotiations between the seller and the blacksmith. She pushed the guy away and removed the cloth from the sword. The weapon appeared before her in all its glory. Claudia blushed. The girl asked if this sword was really forged by Lutz. He, without answering the question, suggested that she could buy something similar elsewhere. Unexpectedly, the guy had to show it, but as the manufacturer, he wants to know how this sword is reflected in the eyes of other people. Claudia took the weapon in her hands. She started waving it and then noticed that it was a good sword. Cool. Looked convincing. She felt like a master just holding it in her hands. Lutz asked her to be careful. If she was not careful, she would get hurt. The girl said that she felt as if her fingers would be cut off just from touching them. It was a beautiful sword, not like its creator. The young man noticed that the girl was chatting as if nothing had happened. Ordinary Claudia, so what he saw was just an illusion. He thought he had the power to drive people crazy, but since she's okay, it must be something else. Suddenly, he noticed that the girl was trying to kiss the sword. He reached out and pulled Claudia away from the sword. She fell painfully to the floor. The hero, in turn, caught the sword. The girl asked what he was doing. Wasn't it dangerous? The hero responded that what she was doing was far more dangerous. If that was what she needed, she could be angry with him. The girl sat up and tried to remember what she was going to do. However, she doesn't remember the last few minutes. Lutz replied that she was going to lick the blade, and he himself thought that his guesses were confirmed. This sword has extraordinary power. It has the power to captivate a person. Claudia realized that the hero had no intention of selling the sword, so she asked him what he was going to do with it. He replied that he didn't even know what to do with it. The girl noted that it was hard for those who did not join the guild. The young man asked her to shut up and asked if she really had no connections to handle this sword. She replied that, and what kind of rich man must he be to just buy it? The guy asked the girl if the hero had a buyer for him, how much he could be sold for. The girl knew he would ask about it, how easy it was to understand what the poor blacksmith was thinking. She also thought about the price of this sword. She offered 50 gold coins. And if it is a rich man, crazy about swords, then maybe even 100 gold coins. The young man was pleasantly surprised. He was shocked that one sword could be used to build a house. The girl laughed and asked what he would do if he couldn't sell it. She offered to trust her with this matter. She could pay for it with her body. The hero asked if her body was really worth a whole house. She laughed and answered that she would have to buy 3 more swords for the deal, to be fair. Claudia thanked the guy for loading the goods. She said that when she found a good buyer for the sword, she would come back to him. In the meantime, they would each do their own thing. She said that they would meet again in 2 to 3 days. Lutz returned to the workshop. He considered the price of 100 gold for such a sword. He does his job well, but his skills are not improving. And although this sword is good, he can't sell it. They are quite similar. The hero smiled at the thought. He said that he didn't care even if the sword didn't sell. He would watch over the workshop as a guardian spirit. For some reason, the main character is very irritated. Lutz was walking down the street and swearing at Claudia. He remembers her saying that they would meet in 2 to 3 days, but a week had already passed. If everything had been as usual, she would have already come for the next order. And so he has no time for this. Since midday, there is nothing to do here, except drink. The protagonist walked into a bar. The bartender greeted him and noted that he was doing well. The young man said that the man still had no sense of humor. Well, what else could he do when he had nothing to do? The man suggested that he have a drink and regain his strength. Lutz sits and thinks about what Claudia is doing now. There has been no news from her for a week. The bartender is surprised. And then he reported that Claudia had been sent to prison. The guy choked on his drink. He didn't believe what had happened and asked again. The bartender thought that he had heard these rumors too. Lately, the Knights of the Order had been busy fighting robbers on the streets. Lutz did not understand how Claudia was connected to them. He explains that the Knights tortured the bandits and they say that they are connected with the city merchants. They sponsor them or something. After that, they began to search the merchants, and Claudia also got caught in the crossfire. The young man finds it hard to believe that Claudia helped the bandits. The bartender said that the local knights are not much different from juvenile thieves. And this is almost an accusation. The hero does not understand why they do this. He answered that he did not know. They say that they protect the traders who pay them. The young man was outraged that it was all for money. After catching unsuitable traders, when they are released, they will be forced to pay for protection, and the knights will profit from it. That's how these pathetic knights think. The boy jumped up and asked what they do with those who don't pay them. The man replied that they are maid servants. The hero thought that Claudia could be bought for a brothel. The guy is shocked that they are ready to do this for money. The bartender confirmed everything and added that it makes everyone angry, but no one can do anything about it. The man asked if Rutz was really going to post bail for Claudia. He asked in response whether he really looked like he had that kind of money. The man laughed and said that if he had money and a job, he would hardly have been drinking since midday. Claudia is sitting behind bars with her hands tied. The conditions of her stay are terrible. There are cobwebs and spiders all around. There is some kind of drink in the boiler and bottles, and some kind of scraps are lying on the floor. The girl is surprised that she was actually locked in such a nasty place. Is being too beautiful really a crime? She drank something from a bottle and noted that they were bad nights. They should at least take off the ropes. Otherwise, she can't even eat normally. Suddenly, she heard the sound of footsteps and stood up. The knight commander entered the cell and said that it seemed she had not paid her tax. They could not afford to keep an extra feeder. Fortunately, as a woman, she is not bad. The man began to look at her. He said that they would sell her to a brothel. But before that, he offered her to live as a prostitute. Now they would test her in action. Claudia sarcastically thanked them for appreciating her beauty, but how could they encroach on an ordinary city girl? If the higher-ups find out about this, it won't be good. He agreed and said that they shouldn't leave damage on the goods. But there are ways to have fun without leaving wounds. The man didn't grab her by the face. He told her to be a good girl. She was imprisoned anyway, and no one would hear her. She wanted to start screaming, but he covered her mouth and told her to be quiet. If she bites, they will beat her until she loses her pulse. Suddenly, Rutz ran into the cell and told them to stop. Claudia was surprised to see the guy. The girl said the guy's name with tears in her eyes. The knights were indignant and asked who it was and what he was doing there. The young man replied that he had come to look after her. He then went on to say that he had come to post bail for her. The commander said that the bail was 20 gold. How could such a poor man pay? He replied that he had no money. But instead he pulled out a sword, which the girl valued at 100 gold. The knights were amazed that he had a sword. They also began to take out their weapons. Rutz asked them not to force him to take their lives. He didn't come here to cause trouble. He would give them the sword in exchange for Claudia. The girl didn't understand what the hell he was talking about. Wasn't this the most precious thing to him? The knights laughed and asked if this sword was really worth 20 gold coins. The hero agreed, and Claudia asked him not to be reckless. The guy swung his sword and struck. He hit the bottle. However, at first, nothing happened. The commander realized that the guy was not threatening them. He really wanted to negotiate. Suddenly, the bottle the guy had hit split in half, and the top part fell to the floor. The man was surprised. The bottle didn't move at all, and it split exactly into 2 parts. This sword cuts so smoothly. Rutz guessed that the main gentleman was the 2nd or 3rd son of a poor noble. If they missed this opportunity, such a sword would be lost. When would they have another chance to get something like this? One of the knights noted that this was indeed a worthy sword. The man said it was fascinating. It must have magic in it. They would have to work their whole lives to get such a sword. The boss admitted that the sword was worth its money and told me to give it to him. But Rutz is not so simple and first said to give Claudia. He agreed and grabbed the girl by the scruff of the neck. Then he threw her into the guy's arms. Then he demanded that she give him the sword. The hero had the feeling that he was giving his good daughter to a freak. But there's nothing to be done about it. After all, it has to be used in combat. The man caught the sword. The knights began to examine this sword. They were delighted. Rutz told them that he had honestly paid the bail, and it should be called a sword, not a blade. Rutz and Claudia are walking down the streets. The girl smiles, and the guy thinks that he has had a hard day. They are walking through the markets. Someone is selling vegetables. The young man thinks that he is very tired and his stomach is empty. He hopes to wrap himself in a blanket in his bed as soon as possible. The girl continues to follow him. He turned to her and asked why she was following him. Wasn't her house on the other side? She replied that she no longer had a home. No cart, nothing else. She had to give everything to those knights. So she asked the guy for permission to stay with him. He didn't understand what she was saying. The girl asked him why he was so worried. He wouldn't leave such a young lady to spend the night in a bare field. He replied that he hadn't said anything like that, and allowed her to stay with him. The girl noticed that Lutz was in a difficult situation. If such a beautiful girl was nearby, he would hardly be able to polish his spear when needed. The hero asked her to answer seriously. She asked why he helped her, and even gave her his precious sword. He scratched his head and answered that he did not understand. He threw away 100 gold coins. Does he really not care? It doesn't matter to her that she doesn't understand the reason for her actions. The guy blushed and turned away. He said that she was his seller, but there was still no buyer for the sword. And he didn't like how knights acted. Claudia smiled and said that she could explain his actions in a few words. She jumped down the stairs and landed on the guy's back. The boy shouted that it was dangerous. They were on the stairs. Claudia whispered the boy's name, and she said that he liked her. He started denying everything and asking her not to say such things suddenly. He treats her differently. The girl couldn't stand his words and simply kissed him. They stood on the stairs and looked into each other's eyes. Then the girl pulled away and walked down the stairs. She looked at the guy, who stood there in a slight stupor. Claudia said that she was truly grateful to him for his help. They would definitely return his sword. Now they had better think about what she could do with her hands instead. The boy blushed. As she had said before, he could have her body in exchange for that sword. Lutz thinks about how she just got out of prison, but it doesn't seem to bother her at all. The girl remembers that before saving her, he himself says that that sword may be a good thing, that it fell into the hands of those bad people. The hero did not understand the course of her thoughts. She answered that it was because the world would see his work. It is his sword that they will brag about, and others will definitely pay attention to it. If this happens, then the higher-ups will find out about it, and then it will become a local legend. If this happens, I'll forget about the knights, and the main knights and the highest aristocracy will one day want to get their hands on Lutz's products. The hero noted that all this sounds like a waking dream. Claudia said that all this is not a fairy tale or a dream. A good weapon repeatedly passes from owner to another, and in the process, someone will definitely find out the name of the man who forged the sword. His name, Lutz. The boy liked the idea that thanks to this sword his name would spread. Suddenly the guy realized and screamed. The girl asked what happened. He spoke like a frog that had been stepped on. He said that he forgot to put his name on the sword. So Claudia started helping him in the workshop. Because of his mistake, he will no longer be able to use the sword. But with the help of this sword, he was able to save one human life. The hero does not regret what he gave up. However, the main character was left with a bad feeling. The stranger waves his sword and says that this is love. He wonders where the master of this masterpiece is. Hero Ricardo, the Count's favorite adventurer. Hero is just a pseudonym. It does not mean that he defeated the Demon King. He is strong, that is why he takes on the extermination of especially dangerous monsters. Successfully defeating a new monster, he receives the corresponding reward, but instead of money, he asks for weapons. Using his new sword, Ricardo cuts through wooden targets with ease. He is pleasantly surprised. He didn't think that the iron sword would be so light. Mr. Gayhard explains that he added a weight reduction spell so that even when surrounded by enemies, he can use it tirelessly. The adventurer thanked the man for this wonderful gift. The knight of the highest rank, Joseph, tells that this is his teacher, Gerhard, and he is a spellcaster. Spells are the ability to impose various effects on weapons using special rituals. The teacher is the Count's spellcaster. He is one of the best spellcasters in the entire country. Gerhard exhaled. He sat at the table and announced that he was finished. Someone opened the door to his workshop and praised him. It was Joseph. The boy assumed that this new sword was for Mr. Ricardo. The spellcaster confirmed everything. The old man asked the knight's opinion about the new sword. He replied that it was excellent, as always. He also added that no one would even dare to doubt his skill. Joseph asked about the spell he cast on him. Gerhard replied that it was a weight loss spell. The knight wanted to say something, but the spellcaster, anticipating all his worries, explained that he had already corrected this spell. He managed to make the sword even lighter. Still, for such a bulky sword, this spell is the best, and it suits Ricardo's own fighting style. The guy said that he had thought it all out so carefully, as expected from a master. Gerhard laughed, and then he said that Ricardo would be happy too. He had increased the spell's effectiveness in such a short time. The teacher's fame would begin to grow. The Count turned to Ricardo. He said that he had successfully completed the task of exterminating the monsters this time too. He had done everything possible. Count Maximilian Zanda decides to reward the boy. He presents him with a sword that was forged by the best blacksmith in the country, and enchanted by Gerhard. Ricardo was very grateful and asked permission to examine the blade. The Count allowed him, and the adventurer picked up the sword. He began to take it out of its sheath. The light from the sword was very bright. People realized that they had once again created a wonderful sword. However, Ricardo's face was not as happy as expected. Joseph and Gerhard noticed this. The adventurer thanked the spellcaster in a feigned and formulaic manner for this wonderful sword. Joseph didn't understand what it was. Was the man disappointed? Gerhard thought that Ricardo had only repeated what he had said last time. He hadn't even noticed that the spell had become much stronger. He looked at him as if to say that he wasn't satisfied with that. People started to surround Gerhard and say that he was as incomparable as always, and they even asked him to make them a sword. The knight thinks that the teacher will probably notice this look too. Everyone stood up so quickly, but the master was definitely not happy to see it. The old man said that he apparently made this sword out of habit. He got too carried away. He finally realized it when he looked at the sword with such disappointment. The old man is inexperienced. Since then, the teacher's condition has changed. Gerhard was freaking out and throwing his swords on the floor. Joseph tried to stop him. The man grabbed his head and thought that the spell would vary greatly depending on the quality of the sword. An ordinary sword would use an ordinary spell. The knight understands that things are bad and tries to calm the teacher down. He asks him not to belittle himself like that. He has wonderful swords. Every knight would like one. Gerhard said that he froze in one place because everything suits them. In what place is the Namakura a great sword? The guy asked that if a teacher consistently produces high-quality work, then he is definitely a master of his craft, right? Gerhard replied that a man is the highest master only when he creates works that the world has never seen before. Joseph fell silent. The old man fell to his knees and screamed that he would soon have to make him a sword again. He would have to make a sword that would defeat this adventurer. He would have to stay awake at night. The old man turned to Joseph. He asked him to bring him a weapon that would awaken him the desire to create. It must be somewhere. The perfect sword. If it exists, the man will be able to create the best sword in his life. The knight was shocked. Gerhard said that he could only rely on him. Joseph walked down the street and broke off the words that the teacher could only rely on him. But he did not understand what kind of ideal sword this was. And in general, did something like that even exist? Then the guy pushed these thoughts away. He is sure that such a sword definitely exists. The teacher always uses swords forged by Mr. Borbus. He is the best craftsman in the country. Usually you won't find better swords than his. But this city is huge. If you search, you can find the sword you need. There should be unknown but talented craftsmen here. He must find such a good sword and a good craftsman. At the weapons shop, he was told that there were no swords that were better than Borbus's. Some blacksmith said that he couldn't make it better than Borbus. The guild worker noted that if they had such swords and artisans, the entire weapons industry of the city would change. The guy went around to all the blacksmiths in the city and found nothing. Come to think of it, it's not that easy to find a good sword in these parts. The teacher and Mr. Ricardo have too keen an eye. To satisfy them, a sword almost the Count's treasure is needed. Joseph remembered the teacher's words about the boy having to get in there. The knight was in despair. He did not understand how he could get this perfect sword. Joseph sat with his head down in thought. However, his thoughts were interrupted by a young man. It was unexpected, so the guy got scared. He asked if his friend hadn't been taught to knock. He apologized and said it was urgent. There was a skirmish at the location of the knight's company. They are said to be waving a newly acquired sword. Joseph was interested in the information about the sword. He asked what kind of sword it was. The guy replied that he didn't know the details, so he'd better go himself. Joseph and his friend ran as fast as they could to the scene. The guy asked what they had done there. The other knights began to complain about their commander. They explained that he decided to appropriate the sword that they received together. Joseph didn't understand what it was. He had never seen such a thin sword. Was it really a foreign something? He continued to shout that it was his sword, and he would not allow anyone to touch it. One of the knights shouted that they had all got the sword together. Joseph did not like this statement and asked what together meant. The knights realized. The boss had heard everything. They had seized the merchants on flimsy grounds and were forcing them to pay an unreasonable deposit. He realized that this is how they got this sword. What they did was stealing. Joseph noticed that they couldn't even be called knights. He wanted to confiscate the weapons, but the scarred knight told him to shut up. He waved his sword and a beautiful girl appeared from there. Joseph was shocked. The lady put her arms around the knight's neck. His gaze was wild. The apprentice of the magic caster Gerhard was surprised that a woman appeared from the sword. The knight said once again that he would not give up the sword. The comrades tried to calm their comrade down, because these were not toys for him. Joseph was still trying to figure out who that ghost-like woman was behind him. She appeared when he took out his sword. The knight said again that he would never give this sword to anyone. His eyes were crazy. The guy assumed that it was because of the sword. He was obsessed with this woman. That knight told the woman that she belonged to him, so he would always be there. And she would be there for him too. The man wanted to kiss the stranger. Eventually, she turned into a sword again, and he kissed the blade of a sharp sword. He wounded his face. His comrades were shocked. The other knights ran to help him. They don't understand what he did. He wounded himself. The man was smiling, though. It looked as if he had drawn a blade across his cheek. The whole situation horrified Joseph. He had never seen a sword like that. Rutz made in his hand. He was very impressed. Joseph tells how those guys didn't want to give it to him, but when he threatened to tell everyone how they make money, they agreed. The old man was interested in the blade that could cut a face. The student tried to stop the teacher. He brought it because he thought it was a suitable sword. But it seems to be cursed. Gerhard calmed the student down by saying that he didn't feel any magic from him. Besides, he was wearing magic tools for protection and showed his hands. Joseph apologized, but still asked him to be careful. The old man understood him. Gerhard took the sword out of its sheath. He began to examine it. The man could not understand what kind of powerful blade it was. There was also blood on the blade. Joseph said that after the recent incident, it had been thoroughly wiped down. If left like that, it would rust. The guy apologized and said he would make sure it was properly treated. He replied that stupid people shouldn't be allowed to work with swords like that. The man began to clean the sword himself. The young man didn't understand what kind of expression the teacher had on his face. He looked both mad and delighted. Bursting into his work, he began to sharpen the sword, but he looked at this sword so strangely. The knight realized that the atmosphere was the same as with the man who cut himself. He noticed how a hand appeared from the sword. Could it be an illusion again? He's not just sharpening the blade, he's like caressing that woman. Gerhard sees his reflection in this sword. Joseph asked if the master was okay. He seemed to be very excited. He agreed and added that he didn't remember much of what happened, but he understood something. He raised the sword up and said this was love. The old man looked inspired. Sir Joseph repeated his words about love. He was very unsure. Gerhard explained that he had a feeling as if he had created the best work of his life. Only a master can experience this feeling. Even the king and the Holy Father are not able to feel it. Joseph is glad that the teacher is inspired again. This way he can create the best sword in the world. Gerhard noticed that the apprentice had helped them meet this sword. He needed to start the ritual right now. Gerhard said that he would put a spell on the sword, and added that it would be good if the owner returned already. The boy wanted to stay and help the teacher. However, the teacher said that he wanted to concentrate alone. If he was distracted, he could damage the sword. The knight asked the teacher to be careful. He doesn't know what might happen, because it's a terrible sword. The man placed the sword on a special stand and placed it on a cloth on which a special pattern was painted. He placed precious stones on the sharp corners of this design, and when the last stone was placed, the sword began to shine. A powerful stream of energy emanated from this sword. It would easily devour the caster if he made even one false move. A silhouette of a girl appeared. Gerhard wondered when he would ever have such an exciting task again. He asked the sword to be gentle with him. He decides to cast a spell that will suit him perfectly. He takes out a special tool. This device is called a chisel. It is a chiseling tool, but that does not mean it will harm her. By chiseling new symbols, it will give her new power. He asked the sword to endure this pain. The sword resisted. The old man was focused. He understood that if he was not careful, the sword would consume his mind. The sword can simply break the support of mental fortitude. the man is interested in what kind of person created this sword and for what purpose he did it. And he did not even leave his name on the sword. This sword fascinates him more and more. He asks the sword not to resist. It is not his enemy. These symbols are order. The old man realized that in order to make it even better, a stronger spell is needed. He has found the necessary power, which is worth granting to him. It is night outside. It is already dark in the Count's estate. Everyone is asleep. And only the sorcerer Gerhard is busy with his new creation. A few days later, Mr. Ricardo, having finished exterminating the demons, visited the Count's residence. The maids were enchanted by the beauty and strength of this man. The maids saw this adventurer and commented on how handsome he was. He fought the wyvern, but did not receive a single wound. He really is a hero. The girl wonders what sword the Count will give him this time. Ricardo thinks that this time, the reward will be another of Gerhard's magic swords. The guy is grateful for the sword he received. As a collector, he is not interested in anything except swords. But if we talk about the previous sword, it was quite ordinary or even a charging one. The adventurer was even upset. Someone called out to Ricardo. He was shocked to see Joseph's emaciated face. He asked what had happened to his face. The knight asked him to accept the bracelet. The boy did not understand what kind of bracelet it was. Gerhard's student said that for this brilliant victory he was entitled to a sword again. Ricardo hesitantly thanked the boy. He explained that this bracelet is a tool for maintaining a psychological state. In order to possess a new magic sword, you must first put it on. Joseph himself almost lost his life. The adventurer realized why he had such a face and asked what kind of sword it was. The knight explained that this sword has a charm spell cast on it. It charms even the owner, not to mention the others, forcing them to bare their blades. Ricardo is surprised that this sword has such an effect even on him, a high-ranking knight. The apprentice of the sorcerer Gerhard confirmed everything and advised his comrade to refuse this reward. The power of this sword is incredibly scary. The adventurer said that it was impossible. This sword was prepared especially for him. If he refuses it, it means that Mr. Gerhard will lose his face. And he himself thinks that he can't refuse after hearing something like that. His soul, a man obsessed with weapons, won't allow him to do that. Joseph knew he would say that, and advised him to put on the bracelet first. Ricardo thinks that such a majestic man, he, the man who slew ranks of demons, cannot simply be bewitched by some magic sword. The Count said that Ricardo had done him a great service by defeating the strongest monsters. He called the boy a protector of their lands and a true hero. The adventurer was not pleased when they praised him like that. He said that they flattered him too much. The Count asked Gerhard to give Ricardo his reward. The spellcaster looked at the guy strangely. He became wary. He didn't understand what kind of expression that was. As if teasing or provoking. Mr. Joseph was fine, Gerhard was fine too, so why were they looking at that sword like that? Ricardo thanked the spellcaster, and he thought to himself that all this was stupid. It doesn't matter what kind of magic is contained in it. A sword is a sword. He then began to think about whether this charm spell would be useful on the battlefield. Charm only works after the enemies are already defeated. At least that's what Joseph told him. The guy doesn't think it's something effective against enemies and monsters. The adventurer asked the Count for permission to draw his sword. He gave the go-ahead. Looking at the sword, the guy thought that this time, it wasn't promising either. He is an adult, and one can say that the reward is simply gratitude. However, such a mediocre sword is clearly not enough. When I opened the sword, everything around lit up. The adventurer did not understand what this sweet aroma was. He noticed that the bracelet was getting hotter. He could not move his hands. Although not only his hands, but his whole body. Someone grabbed his head. It was the woman from the sword. She looked at him with a mad look. Ricardo realized that it was a woman. He noticed that a sword had appeared next to him. The sword this woman holds is just like his. Is she really going to cut it? The stranger raised her sword to strike. The man's body does not move. She strikes the guy's sword and cuts the katana in half at the same time. Ricardo clutched his sword and screamed, his face full of fear. He came to his senses, began to look around, and breathe heavily. The people around were surprised. The Count asked what had happened, because the guy had been screaming. Didn't he really like the reward? The guy started to deny it. He said that he was so touched by such a sword that he involuntarily screamed. The Count offered him to exchange the sword for another if he was not satisfied with it. He replied that he did not need any other sword but this one. He knew at first glance that it was a first-class blade. Ricardo didn't understand what it was. Gerhard looked at the adventurer and smiled slyly. Ricardo was puzzled by this look. The Count said that he had been right to entrust the choice of the reward to Gerhard. And then he asked the adventurer to continue to protect their lands. The exorcist was sitting at the table with Joseph, drinking. He asked the apprentice if he had seen Ricardo's blue face. He wanted to see it so much. The man laughed. Joseph was also shocked. Ricardo did not put the sword to his throat. Gerhard asked what was wrong with that. He answered that it was very wrong. Someone knocked on the door of Gerhard's workshop. The old man realized that it was the hero who had come. Ricardo runs inside and asks what this is all about. The man doesn't understand what he means. He replied that they say that this sword is cursed. Gerhard explained that nothing was imposed on him. The guy asked about the girl. The spellcaster realized that Ricardo had also seen the owner. This was a ghost girl. The guy said that the girl was going to take his life. What difference did it make? A curse or a ghost? Gerhard asked him not to be afraid. The girl who appeared to him was of extraordinary beauty. Ricardo was angry. Was it really such a smart sword? The old man explained that this sword is too beautiful. So much so that all people who see it lose their minds. When he cast a spell on it out of pure curiosity, it turned out to be an incredibly powerful magic sword. Ricardo was outraged. The spellcaster offered to give the boy back the sword if he wasn't going to use it. Instead, he would give him a regular, mediocre sword. Ricardo refused. Gerhard thinks that no matter what the threat, a good sword is hard to let go of. He prefers the best masterpieces to be owned by the best owners. Therefore, this sword should belong to the strongest. Once such a masterpiece was made, a new question arose. The man stood up from his seat and asked the boys not to say inappropriate things and told Ricardo to use this sword with pleasure. He asked both of them to follow him. He would ask for a personal meeting with the gentleman. Joseph was surprised at how serious this question was, since it was necessary to personally meet the king himself. He did not understand what the teacher had in mind. The Count asked again about what Gerhard had said. He asked him to give them a bit of his time. He asks him as a purely professional spellcaster. Ricardo and Joseph were shocked by the words of the master spellcaster. The king assumed that they were now dissatisfied with the reward. He replied that in this castle, doing various interesting work, he himself grew in skills and much more. He is indebted to him. The king did not understand the old man's reasons. He replied that the magic sword he had made this time was the best masterpiece he had ever created since his birth, and he could not create anything better than this. And in order to do something better than this, he asks him for time to practice. The Count is shocked that a man of his order says that he lacks skills. Then he asks Ricardo for his opinion. He replied that he, too, would need time to learn how to wield this sword. He could not afford to accept another sword from the king. The Count said that if the man who made the sword and the man who used it both valued it so much, it would be foolish to force them. The man exhaled and agreed to give Gerhard time. He became inspired. The king asked him to show him a worthy masterpiece if he could produce one in the process of practice. The old man agreed and said that his humble servant was immensely grateful. The king also told Ricardo that he would pay the next reward in money. He agreed. So, having escaped from everyday obligations, he plunged headlong into research. Gerhard's soul became lighter. Having become free, he can conduct absurd experiments. The man couldn't wait for the free spellcaster to spread his wings. The old man wanted to leave, but the king stopped him. Gerhard asked what had happened. He said that he also wanted one of those katana. Since it was easy for him, he asked the old man to do something for him too. All three were shocked, and their mouths were open in surprise. Gerhard thinks that he is opposite an aristocrat, and even though he said easy, that does not mean that he can give him something easy to make. It is also worth answering that in this country, a katana is generally a very rare thing. Maximilian asked the old man not to complicate his life too much. He really would like something light and simple. The king left and said at the end that he would wait with impatience. The man didn't understand where he could get a katana, or where he could even find a katana blacksmith. As a result, will it be found in this country, or will it have to be looked for in other countries? Rutz was clearing away the dishes at this time. He thinks that since Claudia came, the amount of food that needs to be prepared has doubled, but the number of working hands has also doubled. It's good that such hands have appeared. The guy smiled at his thoughts. Claudia came back from somewhere and said that they had work. The hero asked her to be gentle with the door. The girl told him that an order had been placed for 5 daggers for 80 silver coins, an order from the knight's prison. Rutz was surprised that she herself had recently been sitting there and had simply shown up there for work. Claudia told the guy to better thank her for the merchant's courage in returning to such a vile place for the sake of his partner. The young man was grateful to her, of course, but wasn't it reckless? She asked him to calm down, and added that she had heard some interesting news. The knights who had taken the katana had quarreled over it, and they said that the superior had confiscated it. The girl wonders who has it now. Maybe it is in the sheath of some aristocrat. The hero, of course, is interested in where his katana is now, but he has something even more important. Because he lowered his katana, he can admire this smile every day. The boy looked at Claudia, who smiled brightly. Rutz thought that this sad sword was driving him crazy. Now he wants to protect this life together with Claudia. The sellers of weapons A, B, C, and D all denied having katanas in their stores. Some did not even know what a katana was. Gerhard says that this same katana had an original owner. Isn't that obvious? Joseph said no. The man started shouting at the student and insulting him. He asked him not to be angry with him. Gerhard asked to find him the blacksmith who made this katana. Their shouts were so loud that all the passers-by heard it and were surprised. Rutz informed Claudia that everything was ready. He showed her the 5 daggers he had made. Claudia asked if it was true that they would be paid 80 silver coins for them. Rutz, shocked, asked again what the price was then. She was indignant. What, 80 silver? Because for such a thing you can get as much as 5 gold. Claudia insisted that it couldn't be left like that, since the merchant himself had acknowledged the quality. But Rutz replied that the deal had already been made. He explained that the skill of a blacksmith is the ability to maintain quality within the asking price, and he does not worry about lost profits. She called out to Rutz and confirmed that they were indeed going to sell daggers. The girl asked Rutz why he went with her, since she could have handled it herself. Rutz replied that the negotiations would be easier with the swordsman. After all, these people had already put a woman in jail on false charges. Rutz explained that he couldn't let her go alone. She said he cared about her too much. Claudia is worried that these people might remember them. He asked him to stop, afraid that they would be overheard. She suggested that they just sell the goods and leave. They burst into the tavern. The girl loudly announced that she had brought the order. The men were delighted, anticipating drinks and cards. But the girl said that first, she would show them the goods. She ordered everyone to look at the blades, jokingly ordering them to raise their hands up. One of the men pulled out a dagger. The blade flashed blindingly. The men admired the dagger's gleam. They were amazed to find that the blades were sharper than their swords. The old man suggested testing the sharpness of the swords. The other adventurer angrily ordered him to stop, because you can't point a blade at people even as a joke. The girl told Rutz that they, of course, liked it, because the blades were simply excellent. The price was announced in the hall at 80 silver coins. Rutz's companion said that they had made a very good deal. Suddenly, the same customer called out to them, asking them to wait a bit. Rutz and his companion turned around in surprise. The merchant said, "Are these daggers really worth 80 silver coins? He will only pay 60 for them." The man said that the sheath and the pattern were too simple after all. The girl asked if he wanted the price to be reduced and apologized, saying that she was in business. The merchant exclaimed in rage that it would be ridiculous for him to pay such a lot of money for such a cheap thing. He would not buy it unless Rutz lowered the price. The girl said sarcastically that it was "dear customer," and said that it was, of course, not the best product, but still. Rutz said they were canceling the deal. The merchant asked in shock why. Rutsu said about their agreement, and that he could not keep his word. The hero explained that he spent a lot of effort to create them, and their price was not 80 silver, but 5 gold. Rutz said that the merchant could not value the goods, and demanded a price reduction, and he was not in the mood to sell daggers to such a rotten person, The merchant threatened the crowd that if they listened to Rutz, they would turn the blacksmith's ordinary business into a laughingstock. Rutz shouts that these are just words used by fools to justify themselves. Although Rutz was used to the katana and could have taken down one of them, he knew that if he took it out, the others would immediately attack. The hero understood that he would not be able to defeat them all in the minority. Moreover, he needed to protect Claudia. Suddenly, Rutz saw people buying his products with joy and gratitude. He couldn't believe his eyes. They actually bought them. For 80 silver coins. One buyer even said he was willing to pay extra. Another asked if they shouldn't cost the full 5 gold. Claudia, hugging Rutz, said that it was true. She explained that it was a big job for the hero, and he just got carried away. Rutz had reworked and weighed everything many times, and that if they had known about it, they would have understood their value. The man said that he was still negotiating. The other customers told the merchant to answer for himself. They accused him of causing the deal to fall through. The man said that he thought for everyone, and the other traders reproached him for not asking for it. Claudia was glad that, even though they had some problems, in the end, she and Rutz were able to successfully sell all the daggers. She said she was glad that the other knights had paid for that buyer, but Rutz countered that it was for her own safety. The girl said that if Rutz wanted to do something for her, then he should give her the sword he forged. Claudia wondered why he had set a higher amount than agreed upon. She said that girls liked homemade gifts, but Rutz thought that giving a girl a katana was weird. The heroine asked Rutz to make a sword for the girl in love, to which he sheepishly asked if she was ashamed to say such a thing about herself. She playfully asked if Rutz himself was not in love with her. Claudia pressed herself against him and asked if he would do it for her. Suddenly, a disgruntled customer appeared, threatening that they would get into trouble if they sold him unfinished goods. She asked Rutz if that was why he was so worried this time and made these daggers for her. She said she was so lonely in the dungeon, and asked if he couldn't understand. She admitted that she was very worried that she might be abused in prison. The girl said, but it could have ended badly. Rutz noticed that she always behaved so cheerfully. Rutz before. Her feelings came rushing out when she thought, this man has gone so far for me. Rutz was too surprised to say anything other than her name. She had been thinking a lot since that day. She asked if he could make her a katana and promised that she would give herself to him for it. The hero only hoped for her help in the future. She called Rutz a fool, because he did not understand her words at all. She said that in other words, she wanted to devote herself to him. Rutz was shocked to realize this. Rutz thought she was a beautiful girl, but for the first time he noticed how sweet she was. He realized that she was really thinking about him. She said that she wanted to hug him too, and right now. The old man turned to Joseph, who, however, resolutely refused him. The man asked him not to be so nasty. He was worried that, without the sword, they wouldn't be able to start training soon. He was told that no one in the city had seen a katana. The old man now hoped only that they would bring him some kind of magic sword. He explained that the katana had fallen into his hands by chance. Joseph asked if the old man really didn't have any other swords like that in his collection. The old man confessed that he had one before. Joseph exclaimed that he could have presented it to the count without any effort. He asked the old man to show him the sword. Joseph confirmed that it was indeed a katana. But compared to that magical one, this one looked like a pathetic toy. Therefore, as the old man says, it cannot compare to that first-class katana. Joseph understands what the old man is getting at, for him to find it himself. The old man asked sarcastically if he had forgotten to thank Joseph. He replied, surprised, that he had not. Then the old man offered him 20 gold coins as a reward. Joseph was shocked by this amount. He said that it was too much, and he could not accept it. He muttered that he did not deserve the reward, but the old man cut him off, calling it shameful behavior for a knight. The old man asked what would happen if he simply said, I want, reminding Joseph that he could have a wife. And if he finds the master who forged the sword, he will receive another 10 gold, and even more if he establishes business with him. The old man asked how Joseph could provide for his son's future and even start his own family. The young man introduced his family and realized that to realize his dream, he really needed money. They came to the prison, and Joseph asked if they could find something in the place where she appeared. And even though he felt like he had sold himself short, Joseph decided he would do it because it was all for his family. The knight looked at the guards doubtfully, thinking that rumors of their stupidity might be useful for his future family. Later, looking at the strange dagger, the man could not understand what kind of weapon it was. Suddenly another warrior burst in, shouting to be shown the dagger. He claimed that he had bought it honestly. The warrior saw in the short blade not a third-rate piece of junk, but a real, worthy weapon. He admired the beauty of the dagger, which glittered like a treasure, and wished that the same master would make a katana for him. Joseph asked the man where he got the sample katana. He explained that it was a commission for a girl they had arrested earlier. The man added that there was a guy with the girl who looked to be about 20 years old. Apparently, he was the manufacturer. The warrior suddenly realized that his goal was so close. He imagined his wife and son, thinking that he would soon fulfill his mission. He grabbed the man by his clothes, demanding to know the names of the couple, especially the girl. The warrior, in a panic, shouted that he knew nothing. The warrior tried hard to remember the name, mumbling something. Joseph desperately ordered him to remember. The old man calmly assumed it was Clarice. Joseph happily confirmed that it was the same name. It was the name of the tradeswoman he had spoken of. The young man said that he went around to all the merchants in the city to find out her name, and although he did not find her, he found out her name. The old man said that the name Clarice was unknown in this country. He added that the guard's memory could not be relied upon, especially if they were drunk. The warrior suggested investigating again, confident that he would definitely find her this time. But the old man said that what he had found out was enough. The man said that from now on he would take over the investigation himself. He would head beyond the walls. Joseph explained that within the walls lived the nobility, and outside the walls lived the lowly and the bandits. He did not understand why a sword master would live there. The old man explained that blacksmith apprentices study for years, and to get orders, you need experience. And if Joseph became an apprentice, he would start from scratch. The man said that Lutz made such a katana he thinks it is a master who is not a member of the guild. Joseph did not believe that there was the necessary equipment outside the walls. The warrior told Joseph that there were many more people outside the walls, and that his narrow view of the world was ruining his talents. The young man asked if he could investigate outside. The old man refused, saying that he would only hurt the blacksmith's feelings. Joseph also asked to be put on guard duty. The warrior angrily asked why he, someone like him, needed protection. Joseph apologized, saying he was too concerned about the people who dedicated themselves to the sword. The man gave Joseph the promised money and advised him not to take risks and to take care of his family. Some time later, the old man went outside the city walls. He was told that there was no specific place. He gathered information in bars, asking traveling merchants. Thus, the warrior realized that finding the one he was looking for would not be easy at all. He urgently needed some kind of lead to continue his search. He wondered how many more days it would take. Searching for a person in unfamiliar places was unusual for him, and sometimes unpleasant moments arose. The man decided that he needed to expand his search to find that very blacksmith. The old man assumed that the blacksmith needed tools, and perhaps this would help in the search. He remembered hearing something about this place. The boy said that this was a lumberjack village. It dawned on the warrior. There must be a blacksmith here who repairs axes. He saw two women at the well, one of whom said she didn't know anything. One of the women asked the warrior to wait, asking if he was talking about the girl involved with the man. The woman thought it was Claudia. The old man realized what her name was. The women confirmed that she was the blacksmith's girl, and that she was rumored to have gotten their boyfriend. The women vied with each other to tell how their husbands had taken axes from Claudia's boyfriend and were very pleased with his work. The old man asked where the girl was now. He was told that she usually came at the same time to sharpen the axes. He assumed that her boyfriend was also due to arrive today. Hearing the ringing, he immediately ran towards the sound. The old man saw Lutz and realized that this was the same man. He noted that he was indeed young. He noted that Lutz sharpened the axe in a good rhythm, without the slightest hesitation. Only a master could make such a sound. The old man realized that Lutz must be the one he was looking for, but he lamented that he had no other proof. Suddenly Claudia appeared, exclaiming that the old man had a strange sword that looked like a short dagger. She showed the lumberjacks the shining dagger with a grin. She said it was a gift from her boyfriend and told them to look at it. The girl said that if they looked, they would understand everything. Her husband did not just sharpen axes. He was a first-class blacksmith. The man saw the glow of that sword and was sure. Without a doubt, it was he the creator of that magical sword, who made it. The old man is shocked. Could he really be the creator of the magic sword? He has no doubt that it was he who made this Ikuchi. The old man thought that he still needed to make sure whether he had made the katana himself or was just a fraud. The man decided he had to see for himself how he made them. The warrior asked if this was the merchant Claudia, and that they were seeing each other for the first time, and asked her to introduce herself. The old man introduced himself as Gerhardt, a humble servant from the arsenal of the Count's family. The girl was very surprised. Asked how the aristocrat had come to be there, Gerhardt replied that he had gotten his hands on a magnificent sword from prison the day before. Gerhardt objected that it wasn't even a sword. The girl clarified that it was a katana. The old man realized that she knew about that magic sword. Gerhardt confirmed that he had given the sword to the Count. Claudia added that the sword was then given to another person. The nobleman admitted that he too was fascinated by the sword. He asked Claudia if she knew a blacksmith who was good at making katanas. The girl shouted to Rutz that an aristocrat was waiting for him. Rutz answered sharply that he would not go until he finished his work. The old man noted that although the guy was rude, he definitely knew how to do something. Claudia thought that Rutz had reacted strangely. Finally, Rutz approached the aristocrat. He apologized to him for making him wait so long. Rutz introduced himself as a blacksmith. The old man replied that it was an honor to meet him, and that he had come with an offer of work. The young man asked if he wanted to order a katana. The nobleman confirmed, but said he wanted to ask something first. He asked Rutz if he had accidentally made the very sword that ended up in the hands of the knights. Rutz firmly agreed. He admitted that it was he who forged that very sword. Gerhardt wanted to see the sword the boy had in its sheath. Rutz was surprised by such a request. Rutz asked if Gerhardt wanted to make sure he made the sword. The hero explained that he wanted to show him this sword, but he warned that the katana was of poor quality. Rutz said that if he showed the sword, it would not be enough. In his opinion, it would not convince the old man of his skills. After all, a master should always have a good blade in reserve. The old man wondered if the blacksmith really didn't have a favorite sword. Gerhardt came to the conclusion that Rutz was simply selling good swords. He thought that he had simply bought them somewhere. He wondered in shock if this was an impostor. Claudia presented the sword, calling it a true work of art created by Master Rutz. The old man asked Claudia to be calm, but she noted the functional beauty of the sword, created only for killing. However, she felt a certain contradiction in the blade, as if there was some kindness hidden within it. Claudia countered that there was no contradiction, since Rutz had made the sword with love for her. The others doubted whether it was really his work. The old man wanted to see the handle of the sword, explaining that it should have the master's inscription on it. Claudia kindly offered to take a look, but suddenly Rutz shouted at them to wait a minute. Rutz asked not to look, assuring that there was nothing interesting there. Claudia asked if he had forgotten to sign the sword again. The hero replied that the letters were in place. Claudia demanded proof that it was really his work. Rutz panicked, telling Mr. Gerhardt that he hadn't even prepared the sword properly. Gerhardt reassured him that he knew how to handle swords. Gerhardt noticed how excited the young man was, thinking that this must be the sword's creator. He saw the inscription on the handle and decided to take a look. He was absolutely sure that it was not the blacksmith who did this, but someone else. The old man sarcastically asked the girl if this tender message was addressed to her. She was very embarrassed by his question. The girl laughed and asked Rutz what it meant. Rutz, covering his face, said that was why he didn't want to show it. He thought it was a great idea. Claudia exclaimed that Rutz must love her very much. He asked her to stop and not show the sign to everyone, while the old man continued to chuckle quietly. The old man realized that it was a love letter hidden in the handle. He decided that only the sword's creator could do such a thing, and that Rutz did not seem to have lied to him. Rutz apologized for the misunderstanding, referring to them. The old man said that now that everything was clear, he would like Mr. Rutz to listen to his request. He explained that he had another job to finish now, sharpening axes. The hero politely asked the men to come to the workshop later. He was asked if the work was not more important to the Count. Rutz replied that he would lose authority if he broke his word. First, he would fulfill his promise to sharpen the axes. Gerhardt understands the hero and says that he will return later. Rutz will wait for him, The interlocutor apologized for having to talk about work. He asked Rutz if he could ask one question. Rutz asked what exactly. The girl asked about the sword that Rutz had left in the order. She was interested in whose hands the blade had ended up after that. Gerhardt understood what they were talking about. The interlocutor insisted that they should discuss this first. He was sure that the new owner would also ask this question. Rutz was very surprised. The man said that the current owner of the sword is named Ricardo, and that he is rightfully worthy of this blade. After all, he is considered the bravest man in the country. Gerhardt asked if Rutz felt better. After all, if a coward uses a sword, he will not become great. Rutz replied that it is a blessing for the creator if a strong warrior has the weapon. The man declared that the sword was now even better. Better than when Rutz first created it. Because he had, after all, cast a spell on it. He explained that the sword had become strange, demonic, and that it seemed to curse everyone around it to death. Gerhardt wondered if this hero, Ricardo, even knew how to handle such a sword. Rutz wondered if he had done something terrible. But the man told him not to worry about it. After all they could do was create swords. Gerhardt said he should just be proud of his work. Everyone was delighted, because Rutz had created a great sword. By the way, he was told that the Count also wanted a sword for himself. Rutz was asked what he would say to that. He was asked if he would do it, if he would make a sword of the highest quality for the Count. Rutz happily agreed. The man was pleased to hear a positive answer. He said he would cast a spell on the sword when it was finished, and asked if Rutz would mind if he took a look. Gerhardt noted that some people don't like their work to be touched. Rutz responded that, after all, a sword is made for the swordsman. Rutz explained that if the owner says the sword is too long, he shortens the handle. Ease of use is directly related to life and death. The hero admitted that he did not know how to combine his craft with sorcery, but he would be able to craft the sword according to its purpose. The man said that was great. He promised that he would do his best to provide the best of his skills. Rutz asked what kind of sword the Count needed. The man began to describe it. The old man said that the Count was not very good at martial arts. Rutz said that he would therefore prefer a sword that was not too heavy but looked good. The girl called out to Rutz in surprise. She explained that nobles with swords were gathering together, and there Rutz would put himself in an awkward position with a sword that was only there for show. The old man agreed that indeed, whether the sword was used or not, it must also be practical. Rutz muttered that it should be light, beautiful, and practical. All in all, an excellent sword. Gerhardt asked Rutz what he would say to this, and whether he could forge such a sword. The old man became angry, asking if Rutz was listening to him, since he was already in his own world. Rutz confidently stated that he could do it. He asked to give him 2 weeks, and he would finish everything. The Count replied that they would see each other in 2 weeks, and that he would look forward to it. Rutz tells Mr. Gerhardt that he must have impressive fencing skills. He assumes that Gerhardt is an excellent swordsman himself. Mr. Gerhardt sadly agrees, replying that it was a long time ago. Rutz asks to take care of the sword, although he doubts that he will be able to create a worthy blade. He understands that one cannot create it simply by thinking about it. The girl asked Rutz what was the matter. She insistently asked him to answer, but he remained silent with a thoughtful look. She wondered why he wasn't happy, since he had just gotten the best job. Rutz hesitantly denied it. Rutz admitted that he was a little nervous, because he would have to deal with a nobleman. He thought that his life would change completely. Claudia reminded that the main turning point had already happened, when Rutz threw his demonic sword at the order. She assured that she was always ready to help him. She said that the main thing was his ability to work, and everything else was trifles. She hoped that he had started all this not because of that stupid confession. Claudia said she had proof of his love for her and offered to see it. Rutz quickly refused. She noted with regret how easy it was to find his unsent love letter. Rutz thought he had wanted to save it. Claudia said she was very glad she had found out about it earlier, calling it very romantic. Rutz could only ask again in surprise. She happily declared that she now had material to tease Rutz with for the rest of her life. The girl told Rutz that he would be late anyway. She thought that he should rest first. She told him to go to bed. She said that when Rutz got upset, he could come to her bedroom and she would console him. Rutz shouted at her to stop. Rutz sighed in his forge, thinking about her words about everything else being trivial. The hero thought Claudia was a little crazy, but she had a lightness and strength that he could learn from. He remembered that the client needed a sword to survive the first attack, so he needed a strong and beautiful blade. Rutz understood what the shape of the sword should be. All he had to do was strike. 2 weeks have passed. Rutz greeted Mr. Gerhard. He asked if Rutz had made the sword he had asked him for. The hero suggested showing the sword on the street. He was sure that Mr. Gerhard would want to try it out. The old man admired what a beautiful sword Rutz had. He was completely enchanted by its appearance. Gerhard said he couldn't resist a few lunges. He asked Rutz if he could try out the sword. Rutz, of course, allowed it. The old man thought to himself how pleasant it was to lunge with this magnificent sword. He enjoyed every movement. Gerhard said he could hear the blade cutting through the air. He praised Rutz, saying he had made a wonderful sword. Rutz asked in surprise what was the matter. The old man asked if he didn't like the quality of the sword, since it was first-class work. The hero replied that he also liked the result, but added that in fact the blade was not yet finished, since this sword did not even have a name yet. The old man cried out in rage that it had happened again. He shouted that he had already suffered enough because of the sword, which had no inscription on it. Rutz admitted that he was not good at coming up with names. The old man said that he wanted to take the sword home right now, and demanded that a name be thought up and engraved immediately. The hero suggested calling it the Count's Sword, since it was made for the Count. The old man asked him to be more serious. Claudia told the old man that he was right. She explained that Rutz was completely incapable of giving names because he had no sense of beauty. She added that Rutz doesn't pay attention to the decorations. He thinks the sword is fine as long as it can be used. The girl asked Mr. Gerhard for his opinion. She suggested wind cry because the sword cuts through the wind. He replied that cry would be a better word. Claudia said that the name would make even demons weep at the sight of the blade. She suggested calling the sword Demon's Lament. Gerhard approved of the name, saying it was good. Then he held out the bag, saying it was the money for the sword. As he left, he shouted that if the Count liked the blade, he would pay us more, and he was sure that this would be so. The partner said that she never thought that she would work with the Count himself. Rutz replied that for him it was also like a dream. She said that now was the fun part and suggested checking how much money they had received. Claudia noted that the bag was too heavy for 100 silver coins. The girl screamed in surprise. Rutz asked what had happened, thinking that the old man had slipped us counterfeit coins. Rutz asked if this was true. She confirmed that they were gold coins, not silver, and that there were exactly 100 of them inside. The Count said that they should just be proud of themselves. The heroes had created the famous sword that everyone wanted, so it really was worth 100 gold. The partner convinced the hero that this was not a dream, and the hero wondered if he would get change if he used a gold coin at the bakery. What the heroes lost that day does not matter to them. Gerhard entrusted the decorator with the sword created by Rutz. Today, Rutz was supposed to come to the castle to deliver it back. The young man begged to sell him this rare sword. He shouted that he would pay any amount for it. Patrick admired the magnificent scabbard. He admitted that he was in love with his work and these excellent decorations. The decorator thought the sword was amazing. He was sure he would regret it for the rest of his life if he let it go. He then asked him how much he could pay, guessing 20 or 30 coins. The man asked Patrick how much he thought the sword was worth. Gerhard recalled that the sword had been a gift to the Count. He accused the decorator of trying to steal it. Patrick tearfully said that the decorations on the sword were his great achievement and a rare feat in recent years. The older man said he understood the decorator's feelings. He explained that letting go of a well-made thing was as painful as tearing yourself apart. He asked if Patrick really wanted to give up his honorable position as an important servant of the family and the Earl. Gerhard asked Patrick to stop whining. He was struggling to hold on to the weapon he wanted to take. The old man promised to tell the Count that Patrick was responsible for decorating the blade. He forgave him for his trick this time. The man told Patrick not to look at him like a beaten puppy, calling it pathetic. A sword isn't something you just hang on the wall. The old man added that it was a waste of resources for the sword to be wielded by someone who had not fought. Patrick silently agreed with him. The Count suddenly appeared and asked if it was possible to say such things about him. The Count noted that the weather was fine. He said that he had nothing special to do and was going to rest during the day. The guard offered Sir to practice with swords. Sir enthusiastically agreed, asking if even children could hold a sword these days. The man volunteered to help Sir get into shape. Sir suddenly felt unwell and said he was not in the mood for it. The Count said he was not feeling well and needed medicine, so he was going back to his room. He dismissed the guards for the day. Joseph said that His Excellency wanted a sword. He added that otherwise he would not be forced to train. The master replied that there was nothing to be done. He began by saying that no one is born with physical strength. Joseph said he felt bad saying that, but the master told him not to think about it. He did his best to prepare the perfect spell technique. The warrior asked what technique he was using. The master explained that it was wind magic, which improved sharpness and reduced weight at the same time. Gelhard said that if it were a normal blade it would be unfinished, but when it comes to this sword, even a weak aristocrat can handle it. It will be the best sword. Joseph said that he would also watch the work. The master replied that this time he would not be cursed by the sword. The master told the young man to look carefully. Gelhard exclaimed that he would try his best. Joseph couldn't believe his eyes. The young man told the master that it was a beautiful piece of work. He noted that the blade was excellent at releasing magical power. The master objected that it was the sword that did not let him go. He showed Joseph that the sword had withstood the power of the 5 ancient letters. Gelhard explained that a normal sword would break after a couple of hits, but this one exceeded all his expectations. Joseph was curious to see how good the sword was in action and immediately offered to test it out in the yard. The young man exclaimed that the sword seemed to pierce the wind. He asked the master if he wanted to make a few thrusts as well. The hero was puzzled. He asked if the sword should not make the same sound. The master suggested that the sound depends on the swing, or more precisely, on how the wind cuts it. Gelhard laughed at the youth, saying that it was no wonder he couldn't use a sword. The boy begged him to let him try again, but the man said he would not let his sweat ruin the precious gift. He explained that swordsmen are easily influenced by magical blades. Gelhard asked if the hero would go mad and abandon his family. Joseph replied that he lived for his master and family, but the master only told him to give up. The master said that the Count would be pleased with the sword. He noticed that the young man looked just like Patrick, and asked if he felt the same. He said not to be so gloomy, and that one day, Master Lutz would make a personal sword for us too. Joseph suggested that the master add magic to the sword, but he apologized and refused. The master said that the young man would be able to do it himself when he trained and became a master sorcerer. He was reminded that he was the apprentice of a great sorcerer and must take care of his own property. The master sat in his workshop and lamented that he had no motivation left at all. He thought that after the great sword, touching ordinary blades did not inspire him at all. Gelhard felt ashamed of his thoughts, deciding that if the Count was pleased with the sword, then that was quite enough. At the reception, one of the guests admired the Count's sword, calling it a fine work with the name Demon's Lament. The Count replied that he had never used it, since fighting was not for aristocrats, and weapons belonged on the wall. He mentally apologized to the master because he had abandoned the sword, causing it to rust, and asked for forgiveness. The old man cried out that there would be no forgiveness for them. He screamed no in despair as he realized he was stuck in his room, lost in fruitless fantasies. Gelhard ordered himself to forget about the sword, breathe fresh air, and accumulate energy to create a new blade. He decided that he would make a plan for a sword that he would definitely make one day. The master thought that it would be a sword. After all, Gelhard is not getting any younger, and the blade should be elegant, but practical. The old man wondered how he could create a sword similar to the one that had appeared in his imagination. He suddenly heard some noise. Gelhard realized that the sound was coming from the yard. Gelhard saw a young man looking at him. The man asked why Gelhard had that expression, as if it was funny that he was swinging a sword. He just had that idea. The Count said that the old man had made an excellent sword and thanked him. The master replied that the man did not need to thank him. The young man admitted that the sword was so good that he wondered. He asked himself if he could be proud of it just by owning it. The Count asked him if he should learn fencing. After all, as he himself said, a sword is not just an ornament. It was like being pleased with a sword without taking it out of its sheath. He compared it to the stupidity of bragging about one's wife's beauty without talking to her. Suddenly the master asked for forgiveness. He admitted that he had behaved like a snob. The Count replied that he had no objection. He reminded the old man of his own words. The sword must be in the hands. The The Count said that he wanted to know more about this sword, otherwise he could not be considered its owner. He noted that the sound of the sword sounded pompous, and that it seemed to him as if the sword was complimenting him for the swing. Gerhard replied that this was one way of thinking, but that there was no better tool for learning. The Count wanted to try a few ideas, asking what Gerhard would say, who told him to hold the sword with a two-handed grip. The young man was surprised to think that a great sword could change a person's attitude. Gerhard noted that Rutz had made a good sword. Gerhard thought that Rutz himself had destroyed his anxiety when he suddenly laughed, surprising him. The old man was so carried away by the training that he saw how bad the Count was and said that it was enough for today. Gasping for breath, the warrior thought that not yet. He wanted to be recognized by the sword of the crying demon. Gerhard didn't expect the Count to change so much. He suggested starting with creating a strong body, and the young man apologized, to which the old man replied that it was no problem. The old man thinks that the Count wants recognition of the sword, and he wonders what happened to the man who got the sword in the same way. Gerhard wondered if his opponent was using that legendary sword now. The warrior screamed furiously at the monster to shut up and charged. The monster laughed maliciously. He said that if the swordsman broke his sword, then he was finished. He couldn't believe how strong this orc was and that he couldn't defeat him. The warrior dropped the piece in despair. The hero realizes that the orc is twice as strong as the other two mutants and declares that he cannot defeat him. The monster pointed out that the warrior had another sword. He ordered him to pull it out, otherwise he would cut him in half. The warrior hesitated, for he had never wanted to use this demonic sword in battle, but he realized that he would die here if he did not. When the warrior finally drew the shining blade, the monster exclaimed in amazement, "What an incredible sword it was!" The hero realized in horror that he was right. That damn woman was standing next to him and smiling ominously. She whispered something in his ear. The man thought she was cursing him. The orc asked if this was the best the warrior could do. The man didn't understand what was happening. He asked the orcs if they couldn't see the woman. The warrior couldn't believe why the sword's curse didn't work on them. The orc said it was a pity to destroy a warrior so easily and prepared to attack. The orc leader swung his sword, shouting that he would kill the man and take his sword for himself. The warrior looked at the orc in shock. He killed himself and for some reason died with a smile. The other orcs didn't understand what had happened. They wondered if it was the sword that had caused their comrade to commit suicide. The frightened orcs decided that the warrior's sword was cursed and began to flee in panic. The man thought that even the enemy's minions had fled. He realized that the enemy's strength was more than real. The warrior wondered what had happened to his enemy. He could not understand what this strange sword was, and whether the enemy was really dead. The lord asked in bewilderment if it was really a giant orc, and if it was a mutant. The man said he didn't remember mentioning mutants in the request. Gerhard replied that if they had written the truth, no one would have come for fear of a powerful enemy. Lord said that something like this must be done to prevent it from happening again, and he apologized to Ricardo for having to deal with it. Ricardo asked what had happened to the Count today. He noticed that he usually listened to his reports with the interest of a child waiting for a fairy tale. The young man wondered if the Count's behavior was connected to the unfamiliar sword at his side. The man asked the Count with dignity how he had killed the monster. Ricardo said that when he was cornered, he resorted to the demonic sword. It manifested the magical power that Gerhard had given him. The man explained that the orc was immediately enchanted by the sword, after which he killed himself. The Count asked Ricardo doubtfully if he could even swing the sword. He asked if he had anything else to say. Ricardo shouted to his lord that this power was a real curse. He added that the orc who committed suicide was smiling. Everyone was shocked to see the dead orc. Later, the elder turned to the master and said that he felt uncomfortable talking about the sword he had given him. The man was shaking with fear. He was afraid of his sword, because when he draws it, it instantly fascinates both people and demons. Those standing next to him visibly tensed up, and the man continued to tell that the blade was capable of wounding not only enemies but even allies. The demonic sword could harm its owner. The man with the beard could not stand it and raised his voice at the narrator because he already understood everything. He menacingly reminded that no matter how the circumstances turned out, the place had saved the man's life, and it was impolite to call him demonic and terrifying after that. His indignation knew no bounds. He continued to scold the knight. He tried to convey that it would be right to thank the weapon first. The knight was shocked. Did this old man really want to force him to express gratitude to the sword? The king, listening to their squabble, exhaled heavily, but he also expressed his agreement. He took his blade out of its sheath. For him, the sword is the link between life and death, and therefore the swordsman should be grateful to him. The ruler himself expressed gratitude to his war weapon. The knight did not understand their views. He himself considered the sword just a tool. The old man explained to the young man that the craftsmen put their soul into making the blade, and the warriors trust it with their lives, so it could not be just a tool. All four were in the throne room. After the old man spoke, he proudly folded his arms across his chest and turned his head away from the knight. The king only sighed. The knight thought hard about why there was such a tense silence. It even seemed to him that perhaps he had gone crazy. But then he rejected this thought, however. Everything seemed too strange. He was confused by how emotionally attached everyone was to their weapons. The king broke the silence and turned to Ricardo. It seemed the boy had no connection with his sword. The ruler decided that it was bad for the sword to be without a name. He asked the young man to give him a suitable one, and then he would have a chance to get the blade. He could have received the name from the swordmaster himself. His Highness asked Gerhard to write him a letter of recommendation. Ricardo still didn't understand why a name was needed, but in response he received an even more extensive explanation. The sword is the spirit of the swordsman, and with a good name, its shine becomes brighter. The old man threatened the young man with his finger. This time he would receive a name from the blacksmith. He was interested in whether the guy understood everything. The young man went to look for the destination, looking at the map, at the same time thinking that there was something wrong with everyone. They looked like fools with swords, as if they were controlled by the weapons themselves. He did not understand it at all. Arriving at the right place, he was preparing to knock on the door, but the thoughts in his head did not subside. He also liked blades, and even had a collection, but treating them like people was definitely not for him. The boy decided that he would never become such a fool with a sword. The door opened, and a girl appeared in front of him. She asked the knight who he was. The young man found it very beautiful, but only asked out loud if it was the workshop of Master Lutz, who had created his sword. The mistress's eyes widened as she looked at the blade. She turned and shouted into the house, telling Lutz that the sword had returned home and its owner, the hero, was present. Ricardo was surprised to see the master. He turned out to be younger than expected. The master was delighted when he recognized his weapon. The blacksmith immediately understood the reason for the visit. He was required to give a name to the sword that carried the curse. The girl added on her own, if they saw an orc with the same expression on his face, who decided to end his life, she would be shocked and traumatized. The men did not understand the meaning of her words at all. Ricardo claimed that he had never seen such a horrific death before. The blade was even capable of causing its owner to hallucinate. The master had created a truly terrible weapon. Lutz felt awkward. He felt embarrassed when he was praised like that. The young man grabbed his head. It was not a compliment. He did not understand what was wrong with this blacksmith. He turned out to be as stupid as everyone else. The girl asked the man about his hallucinations, what kind they were. The knight said that it was a woman, and that his imagination did not belong to him. The master knew this, and his companion asked him to tell her more. The guy had nowhere to go, and he said that as soon as he pulled out his sword, something sweet smelled in the air. The next moment, he noticed a girl standing behind him. She was bleeding. The knight found her very creepy. Ricardo felt that if he let his guard down for just a moment, he would be cursed to die. The master replied that he had thought so, about the girl spilling blood. The blacksmith suddenly had an idea. It seemed he had come up with a suitable name, but the girl did not let him finish the thought. In her opinion, something similar to Bleeding Girl might have come to mind. The guy listened to their squabble with a sullen look. The master was upset that his companion did not give him a chance, but the girl remained categorical in her decision. She was almost certain that if Lutz said the name, their ears would immediately wither. She took the sword in her hands and repeated the knight's own words about visions of a sweet-smelling woman. It seemed he meant that this weapon was a girl. The young man, looking at her, thought that even a beauty treated a sword like a person. But could it really have sexual characteristics? Then she suggested the name Tsubaki, camellia, which is the name of a flower, so it was perfect for a woman. Ricardo thought about the proposed option, but it sounded too elegant for a demonic sword. Lutz disagreed. The camellia was a flower that shed its petals whole, not one at a time. He believed that the flower's grace was a perfect match for the beauty of this blade. He then asked the knight if he had any other suitable ideas, but nothing in particular came to mind. probably Camellia was a good fit. The blacksmith took the sword, the name was decided, now it was necessary to write it down as soon as possible. The guy tried to stop him. He shouldn't have pulled out the weapon so recklessly. It can only be kept in special conditions. The young man handed the master a special object, but the guy did not accept it. He was sure that the blade would not harm him. The knight doubted it, because how could the blacksmith know for sure? However, Lutz assured him that it was because he had created it. Ricardo was angry at the strangeness of the people here. He didn't understand why they all loved and believed in the demonic sword more than he, its owner. The blacksmith picked up his hammer to begin work, but stopped. It became clear to him that the blade was definitely under great pressure. A terrifying image of a woman appeared behind him. She stretched out her hands to the man's neck. The blacksmith, without even looking back, immediately felt the girl behind him. If he looked back at her, he would be strangled immediately, or he would do it himself. However, despite everything, the master was not afraid of her, but even felt gratitude. The woman saved Klaus's life and brought Lutz all sorts of connections. It was with her that it all started, he thanked her again. All the bloodstains and the sinister look disappeared from the girl's image. The blacksmith understood that she had come a long way, and as a sign of his gratitude, he bestowed upon her the name Tsubaki. He carved the characters into the hilt of the sword. After this, the knight was about to leave the house, and as he was leaving, the blacksmith asked if the young man was going to use the blade in the near future. The answer was yes, because he had been tasked with exterminating werewolves. The man had heard of Master Ricardo's abilities, so he handed his sword over to him with a clear conscience, but with a request to be nice to her. The knight nodded quickly. Walking away from the house into the forest, the young man exhaled. The words about being nice were spinning in his head. He still treated the weapon with caution. After all, it was a demonic sword. It was unlikely that it could be tamed by simply giving it a name. It seemed to him that the best solution was not to pull out the blade at all. But the monsters looked quite frightening. This time there were 5 werewolves. It would be difficult for the knight to deal with them all at once. The boy again came to the conclusion that it might be better to take out the sword, although there was still a chance that he would be at an even greater disadvantage because of the blade. One of the monsters noticed him and immediately attacked, waving its huge, clawed paws. Ricardo flew to the side, managing to react to the blow, but he realized that he was surrounded. The young man found himself in a situation that forced him to use his sword, and while he was thinking about what to do, the werewolf attacked again. The boy remembered the words that a swordsman should be grateful to his weapon. The werewolves attacked more and more. Another attack wounded the knight. The sword is the swordsman's soul. If you give it a good name, it can shine. The guy was surrounded on 3 sides. He was still hesitating, not knowing what to do. He considered himself different from all those fools who love swords. He could not blindly believe in it. Doubts tore his mind apart. However, the next moment the decision was made. The man drew his blade and called him by name, commanding him to cast a curse on the monsters. Suddenly, their behavior began to change. The werewolves threw their heads back, uttering heart-rending cries of pain. They tore their muzzles with sharp claws. They bit into each other and tore flesh. The young man was horrified by what was happening. All the wolves were dead. They had wounded themselves and then killed their own comrades. The only one of the monsters managed to stay alive. He attacked the knight standing nearby. The guy had to react immediately. He swung to strike. With one swing of his sword, he cut the monster in half. The guy himself did not expect such an effect. Apparently this was Tsubaki's true power. At these words, the image of a demonic woman appeared behind him. The girl turned to the swordsman, asking if she was really strong. Her face looked quite sweet. Big, beautiful eyes. A slight smile. The previous frightening appearance disappeared without a trace. The whole situation gave Ricardo an inner turmoil. He is a swordsman who was called a hero by many. All his achievements up to this point were due to his own skill. No matter how good he was at wielding weapons, he lacked emotion. But now, everything in his head had changed. The situation had left a mark inside him. Meanwhile, in the castle, the old man was worried that the words he had spoken to Ricardo the other day had been too unreasonable. After all, he understood that the boy was not his subordinate or student. His interlocutor tried to smooth over the indignation. According to him, everyone wields a sword in their own way. The old man had the right to give his assessment. The young man asked the master not to worry. Apparently, Ricardo liked his sword. He added that the knight was resting at the inn after the mission, and offered to come and visit him. They really decided to drop in on the visit. The old man enthusiastically noted that the young man was noticeably surprised. Did something really happen on the mission? Ricardo slept on the bed, hugging his weapon. The guests found similarities to what would happen if a girl were lying next to him. Tsubaki go again, Gerhard relaxed. Now the guy was like one of those sword fanatics. He definitely didn't want to become like him. People always have ups and downs. When someone was in the spotlight, some found themselves out of it and therefore went into the shadows. Gerhard was sitting at the table, holding a mug in his hands, and there was persistent knocking on his door, looking for a man. The old man opened the door. He recognized the man standing in front of him. It was Borubis Hirn. The master asked the guest what he needed. The man showed Gerhard a box at his feet. It turned out to be 10 daggers, ordered earlier. The blacksmith had only recently finished with them and decided to bring them in right away. The master thanked Borubis for his service and then asked him to deliver the order to Jozo. Then the man handed the blacksmith his payment, 10 gold pieces, and specified that it could be checked. However, after some time Gerhard noticed something strange. The guest did not leave. He once again reminded the blacksmith about the work done and that now he could go home. Borubis hinted that the dagger did not hurt him either. The man also added, "Didn't the count ask you to give him a gift? Because there was a rumor that the hero often took credit for his achievements. After all, if a man took credit for something, he should be rewarded." The blacksmith believed that he was impatient to receive his sword. But the old man thought otherwise. It was Borubis who was impatient. Gerhard told how Ricardo had received his sword so that he would not need a new one for some time. This disappointment struck the blacksmith to the very heart. While another of the master's subordinates was busy with the box, the two continued to talk, the man asking the old man how long this would last, but the answer was disappointing. Perhaps the hero walks with the sword for about 10 or 20 years, or maybe until the end of his life. The guest was still lamenting. His orders were running out. The situation was generally dire, but he still believed that his swords were needed by everyone. After all, they both had to be on the same side. The master answered quite rudely. He did not do this for the sake of the blacksmith's workshop and Borubis himself. He did not order from him because the old man did not need it. It was a simple truth. After that, he waved his hand at the guests so that he could go home, and in case he did not voluntarily, he would be thrown out as a suspicious person. The man agreed to leave, but first he had to ask one more question. Who would use the daggers he had brought? His hope was for the knights of the castle. But it turned out to be wrong. The weapons were intended for the apprentice. The blacksmith began to seethe with rage. Did his interlocutor really not understand what he was doing? If you can't control magic, then the weapon can be destroyed. That was what the training consisted of. The door closed and Borubis went back, but in his soul he was very angry, because the daggers into which he had put his soul and heart could easily break, and Gerhard would not care. The knight was worried that since the blacksmith had been told about the apprentice, he would certainly be offended. The old man didn't mean to belittle the man. He just ordered from him, because he knew he could make swords strong enough for training. Then he took the lid off the box, and they were both surprised. The daggers were simply stunning, with silver ornamentation inlaid with precious stones. Perhaps they were Patrick's work. The piece resembled his style. The knight did not believe that such a job could be done for just 1 gold coin. The old man was of the same opinion. Gerhard generally counted at least 3 gold coins to get a profit of 10 gold. The blacksmith clearly did not behave very wisely. He had to make the count happy, regardless of profit, for the next job. The guy liked the product. He thought the dagger was excellent, at least in its basic form. Perhaps it would not hurt to praise the master for his work. Gerhard threw down the blade in displeasure. For him, all weapons were complete nonsense. The man asked the knight if he remembered the time when he himself owned the Demon's Cry sword, because the guy really enjoyed waving it. The old man meant that these blades should have given the same feeling, but none of the swords did. He was unshakably sure that a blade that did not arouse the desire to kill people was not the right weapon. The young man felt a little uneasy from the master's behavior. He asked Gerhard where they could meet Lord Borubis, since the men had known each other for a long time. The old man was not pleased with the question. Why did the young man need to ask about it at all? But the knight had no such intentions. He thought that there could be a special relationship between the acquaintances. It wasn't that it was difficult for the man to tell, but he was ashamed. The young man smiled contentedly. He was very interested and wanted to hear everything from the very beginning. The master, confused, rubbed his eye. There was nowhere to go. He asked Josel what he thought of when he heard the words, legendary sword, but the boy did not quite understand the meaning, after which he received clarification. Did it cause admiration? The knight hesitated with the answer, but answered that a great sword passed down from generation to generation. Sounds romantic. Gerhard, as a man who lives by the sword, should feel nothing but romanticism towards the, quote, legendary sword. The man told his story from 40 years ago, when he was still an adventurer. He, with 3 companions, repeatedly challenged the labyrinth where the legendary sword was found. It was a challenge that took several years. The whole team believed that finding the blade would bring them glory. The man didn't know exactly how many attempts it took them to get to the dungeon. Luck was on the friend's side. Everything was going as they had planned. They couldn't miss such a chance. That's exactly what each of them thought. But when they reached their destination, something was already waiting for them in the deepest depths. It caused horror inside the adventurers. Guarding the treasures stood a gigantic, never-before-seen monster. Even the men were filled with fear. None of the group knew how to deal with the monster. At that moment, they really needed to run, but only the friends had no idea what they were getting into. The adventurers could not just run away when the treasure was so close. They decided to fight, but the monster was strong. It managed to grab the girl. The humans were weak. Blinded by greed, they recklessly rushed at the powerful enemy, which soon led to consequences. The Seekers tried to fight with all their might, but only received injuries. In the end, they managed to defeat the demon, but 2 of their comrades were killed. When the survivors saw the horrible corpses of their friends, they realized how insignificant they were. Gerhard tried to console his comrade by reminding him what they were fighting for. It was all to get the legendary sword, because when they opened the chest, they would be able to receive all the honors they deserved. The man was also sure that the death of his friends would not be in vain, because they would all become heroes. They approached the treasure with the intention of finally seeing what kind of sacred weapon was there. Inside the box was a rusty blade. It was a complete disappointment. Their expectations and efforts were not justified. Chazelle himself was surprised that the find was a bronze sword, and it was the legendary sword in the chest. The guy asked the master if they had searched the labyrinth using the archives. The answer was yes. He decided that the document was a fake. Gerhard did not support his guess, because the archives were written hundreds of years ago. There was a time when people fought with stone axes and clubs. The bronze sword was a treasure of unrivaled sharpness for those who fought with it. In ancient times, such a blade was considered the greatest, and was hidden in the labyrinth, but as time passed, it could not even penetrate the armor of an ordinary soldier. The craftsmanship of the craftsman is constantly improving, and a sword made hundreds of years ago is never taken as good as in modern times. Gerhard and his friends were simply intoxicated by the term legendary sword. In addition to the unjustified find, there was the price they all paid, the death of their comrades. At that moment, the man destroyed the blade with a powerful swing, striking it against the stone. The only survivor, besides Gerhard himself, was he Borubis. After this incident, both men left the adventurer profession, and the friend became a blacksmith, and the old man became an apprentice to the sorcerer, and they each chose their own path, based on their bitter experience in the labyrinth. Borubis thought it didn't matter how much time passed. The legendary swords in the labyrinth couldn't be that bad. If you master the technique, you can make a weapon that will scare people hundreds of years from now. Friends believed that they could create such a weapon themselves. The man remembered all this with sadness. He rose from the table. It seemed to him that he had gone too far. Josel, however, saw it quite differently. The young man briefly noticed the reason for the master's passion for making weapons. Master Borubis had the same enthusiasm as the old man. The man only chuckled that perhaps it was like that 40 years ago. The old man also added that gradually his friend forgot how to hone his skills and turned into a boring man who produced only simple things. All he cared about was protecting his master's position. The man was angry. Could this really be the legendary sword? Borubis was furious. He tried to shake out information about the guy who made the blade that the Count was obsessed with, but the man knew nothing. He didn't think that any of the craftsmen could even know such a person. The young man reminded the blacksmith that everyone was going to the guild meeting. If he was late, then he would definitely lose his place. At the meeting, the chief foreman suggested, as usual, to begin by deciding on the distribution of work. They already had a large order from the order, and therefore, this month, everyone gathered will have to work together on this work. Barabbas folded his arms in displeasure. After all, it was he who always dealt with the count's affairs. Someone had taken them from him, and for a man this seemed unforgivable. The other craftsmen were quietly talking among themselves. Someone heard that Barabbas had lost his job with the count. Ridicule was heard from all sides. People were openly making fun of the blacksmith because he had lost his job because of a stranger, and yet everything was in his hands. The man felt pain in his chest. Could the whole situation really have affected him so much? He was surprised at himself. He felt fury towards all these people. He didn't need their pity because they had never done it before. The blacksmith was shivering. Another master asked him why the man was suddenly sweating, because his reaction was strange. He replied that there was nothing to worry about. Everything was fine. Barabbas decided to visit Patrick. The guy greeted him quite warmly and asked what brought the master to him. The man wanted to know about the sword that was given to the owner of the establishment himself. The young man started dancing all over the workshop, saying all the time how good it was, how great a job had been done. He was delighted that he was allowed to sew a dress cover for such a beautiful girl. He did not want to lie to the guest. The blacksmith was seething from his evasive answers. He only needed an answer, and he did not come to contemplate the bizarre dances. Barabbas wanted to know the name of the blacksmith and whether there was any inscription on the sword. Patrick denied everything. They weren't supposed to talk about such things. There are such things as privacy and personal life. Coins poured out of the bag. The man did not calm down. He just wanted to talk like a master to a master, and not subtly hinted whether this amount was enough. The young man thoughtfully twisted one coin. This was good enthusiasm on the part of the guest. Apparently the goal was communication, but the guy himself was not very concerned about it. He finally decided to tell, and he began with the name of the sword, the Crying Demon. Then he named the name of the blacksmith, Lutz. Barabbas had never heard of such a thing. He wondered if there was such a person in the guild. Patrick subtly suggested that if that person was really there, he would probably live behind the wall. This came as a surprise to the man. If the young man was really behind the wall, then he was a simple blacksmith. However, it seemed more like nonsense. He couldn't understand how all those guys behind the walls could make decent weapons at all if they couldn't even join the guild. Patrick clarified that the problem was in the guild. Then he asked Barabbas what the point of their existence was. The man was surprised by such a sudden change. The blacksmith had to explain that the guilds existed to stabilize the distribution and sale of raw materials. They also protected and trained craftsmen. Barabbas himself benefited. The guy agreed, but the last point was questionable. The man chuckled. Wasn't protecting and training new masters the most important thing? The young man was busy counting coins. He believed that it was not about protecting artisans. Perhaps the system was not aimed at protecting artisans, but at protecting masters. The guild system had a limit on how many people could become masters. This could mean that anyone who did well would immediately threaten the master's position. Barabbas was getting nervous. Patrick continued to reflect at the master, who had difficulty handling an experienced apprentice, told him to go to training, and for many years the master himself remained in the dark. The boy thought that Lutz was a good apprentice who was kicked out of the guild. The blacksmith found this funny. The young man did not really believe his words. In his opinion, Barabbas was too frivolous with his students, despite the fact that he talked about his secret methods, but was in no hurry to teach them. The man considered this an unnecessary way of caution, because the leak of technology threatened the collapse of his workshop. Patrick suddenly came very close to the master's forehead. He repeated the words about training artisans. Was that the meaning of the guild's existence? He was right about that. Barabbas's words did not correspond to his own principles, which made the young man doubt the meaning of the guild's existence. He also asked if the man himself knew about the reputation of his workshop. The blacksmith closed his eyes, and then the boy himself told him the public opinion. Many believed that he did not train new apprentices, and therefore there would be no future. People considered the establishment a graveyard of artisans, and there were many such rumors. The master became increasingly uneasy. He felt both anger and annoyance at the same time. The pain in his chest returned, and he denied everything, calling it a lie, because he was making sure his apprentices were well fed. The pain intensified. The man began to tremble. He was confident in his attitude. The manifestation of his care consisted of good payment and training of skills of new future masters. Everything was done exclusively for them. Patrick was taken aback by this reaction, but quickly found a way out of the situation, brushing it all off as mere rumors. He turned away from the guest, throwing him words about his hope that everything would be fine. And not just fine, but better than anyone else. Barabbas was still shaking, wondering who could have spread such information. A fictitious name, Graveyard of Craftsmen, was spinning in his head. Because of this, his 40-year reputation was considered a graveyard. He was determined not to put up with this quietly, and called Wilson. The boy came quickly to the call. Of all the blacksmith's apprentices, this one was considered the best. The man asked him to put all his skills into creating a new sword. The young man was interested in who the blade was intended for. He needed to know more about this. The teacher refused. The weapon was not for sale. Barabbas decided to make it a test, to see if the student could pass the exam for promotion. Other workers also heard their conversations. The boy got the meaning of the master's words. He assured him that he would show his best blow and hurried away. The other apprentices were surprised that all restrictions had been lifted. They discussed what had happened to Wilson. The boy was not getting any younger, and now their master had finally decided on a successor. Some thought they would be held forever, with no freedom of choice. Barabbas silently thought about his 40 years of sword fighting, the skills he had cultivated now embodied in the flesh and blood of his students. He wanted to believe that his students would be able to prove to him that all those years had not been a mistake. Wilson was working hard on the task, and his colleagues were discussing during the lunch break whether the master and apprentice would even take on the task. It was unknown, but there was an opinion that he would complicate things again, and make it so that he would lose. A few days later, Wilson finished and hurried to report to the teacher he did everything he could with his technology, and asked to take a look. The blacksmith held the beautifully crafted sword in his hands with satisfaction. The apprentice was worried about his opinion, but the reaction remained unclear. The master tightly closed his eyes. At that moment, Barabbas knelt down, still holding the blade raised. The boy was afraid that something had happened to him. The man raised his head. His whole face was filled with tears. He was smiling. The young man was trying to find out if everything was okay with the teacher and what quality the work was. The blacksmith praised the apprentice. The blade came out very well. The young man did very well what he told him. But there was something else with the sword. It was simply useless. Everything was standard, without any individuality, a sharpened iron rod. Just a copy, an improved version. The student was shocked. Barabbas lamented that the nickname given to his workshop was entirely true. It turned out that he really only trained mass producers who did what they were told. He asked his apprentice for forgiveness and promised to teach the boy and the others all his skills from now on. Wilson didn't understand what was happening. The man then explained the next steps. The student would have to test his sword again for strength and present it at the next meeting so that he could officially become a master. As soon as the young man received the Earl's seal of approval, he would immediately become the next master of the workshop. The blacksmith encouraged him as best he could, but Wilson himself was delighted with such an unexpected change. The other apprentices, hearing the news about the training, were also happy. Barabbas knew perfectly well that he was not born to become a master. He just wanted to become better and make good swords. But when he became a master, he was just trying to protect his position. In his memories, he was always yelling at his subordinates. The man took a deep breath. Now that he was no longer a master, he was able to feel free like never before. But now the question arose of what he should do. He definitely felt like he wanted to strike with a sword. Not just strike, but become better than the real version of himself. Later, in the tavern, Barabbas met Gerhard. The old man asked him what he wanted this time. Was there really trouble again? The master asked his friend to introduce him to a blacksmith named Lutz. The friends spent the evening quietly talking. Gerhard was surprised at how easily his comrade was able to give up his title of master. He said that he was too stubborn, he should have done so long ago. The man, contentedly drinking from his mug, assured that he had not retired yet either. The old man chuckled. For an apprentice, this was not good. He was still sure that his friend had called him because of the troubles that had arisen. Barabbas repeated again what he had already asked. He wanted to meet Lutz. His interlocutor was taken aback. He was clearly surprised. The image of a young man appeared in his memory, and he began to worry in general, wondering if the blacksmith had decided to hand the boy over to the guild, or something like that. The master hastened to assure that the option with the guild definitely had nothing to do with it. His only interest was in the meeting. The man needed to learn blacksmithing from him, and his friend's face reflected complete incomprehension. He honestly didn't understand how it was supposed to be. His comrade wanted to gain new skills after he left his post, and apparently the master expected that he could just come to him and Lutz would teach him just like that. Barabbas punched himself in the chest. He was ready to offer to teach his own skills in exchange. Perhaps this would interest the young man a little. Gerhard considered Mr. Lutz to be quite young and did not understand how it was possible to bow down to him at their different ages, but the master did not care. The blacksmith was having fun. They became masters at the age of about 20. When young apprentices shouted at them, the old man was pleased. It seemed his friend had prepared thoroughly. After this, the old man agreed. He himself would go and ask the young man for cooperation. The master completely relied on him. Later, the men went to visit Lutz. The guy was smiling radiantly. He did not expect that he would be offered a technical exchange. Gerhard asked again if the guy was really ready to make such a deal, since he could lose his own equipment if he made the deal. The young man scratched his head and answered. His problem was that he couldn't do business within the city walls. There was no point in him having a monopoly on technology. Besides, he was interested in Barabbas' skills. The man was delighted. He was fired up by the thought that he could be useful and promised that he would spare no effort to tell all his knowledge. The guy thanked him, but added something else. He seriously considered himself to still be the best when it came to spreading information on how to make a sword. The guests pondered his words. The old man even admitted that the blacksmith had achieved great success. Barabbas rose from the table. With a bow, the man asked Mr. Lutz to teach him the instructions. The guy extended his hand. For him, too, this was a mutually beneficial cooperation. They shook hands in honor of the agreement. 2 swords were made. The first one turned out to be too strong in terms of magical power. The second one, on the contrary, was too weak, and the magical power did not take hold. The boy apologized as soon as he was put to practice on the invested knowledge, and the dagger and the gem were broken. Gerhard burst into laughter at the situation. He encouraged the disciple not to worry. Jewels are expendable for a practitioner. From now on, he would have to turn dozens of such stones into dust. The old man was already shouting at Josel not to be afraid, no matter how expensive the jewels were. They were just stones. If he was afraid, it meant the young man had no place in the ranks of the masters. He asked him not to be afraid and not to give up. A few minutes later, the young man made another blade, literally with his last strength. The teacher thoughtfully examined the product. To check, he poked it into the object, and it gradually began to smoke. Suddenly, a bright flame of fire flared up after the touch of the weapon. The master was pleased with the student. He managed to create a fire dagger. However, if it takes a long time to light it, it is unlikely that such a weapon can be used in combat. The old man would not do such a thing. The old man told him that fire can only be applied to one dagger. There are many adventurers who would like to try this. The fire attribute is the most universal. On sale, this cost as much as 15 gold coins. Josel was surprised. It was quite profitable. The man laughed and explained that in order to make money on the spells, he might need 2 or 3 more. But for now, the guy didn't need to think about it. Then he reminded the guy that the training was not over yet, and he needed to continue. Watching the apprentice work, Gerhard thought that it was time to simply hammer the skills into him. In his opinion, a diligent person could learn. His gaze went to the window. The question was spinning in his head. Was he doing it right, unlike Josel? I wanted to see how well Barabbas could master new skills, and the master, meanwhile, studied diligently, carefully observing Lutz's work. The powder used to make swords is called tamahagane, which is directed, beaten, and straightened. The rolled tamahagane is bleached with a mallet into 2-centimeter squares and split into small pieces. For the core, choose soft iron with a low carbon content, and for the skin, hard. Then the steel is piled up and cooked. The selected tamahagane is piled up on the lever plate. The processed steel balls are also piled up on the plate. Then, everything is heated together and folded into a single lump. The edge is rubbed to remove impurities. A notch is made with a hammer, then turned over and struck again. This process is repeated about 8 times for wrought iron and about 15 for leather. The wrought iron is then wrapped in an iron skin, forge welded, in which the 2 pieces are heated and beaten together to form a single piece. It is then beaten with a hammer into the shape of a rod, after which it takes the shape of a sword. By repeatedly striking the iron core, multiple layers are formed on the sword. The secret of the sword's strength is that the two metals in the core iron give it the contradictory properties of being hard but not breaking. Barabbas was surprised. The sword seemed to come to life. Lutz at first did not understand what the man was talking about. But then I realized that the old master had also been breathing life into his products for several years now. In his youth, Barabbas was sure that he would have delivered every blow to the sword with the same sincerity as the young man, because he always wanted to do only better. The man felt pleasure, and the feelings of the time when he was burning with desire to create swords returned to him. A girl, Lutz's assistant, looked into their workshop and said that she had brought tea. She noticed that the old master was sweating heavily and suggested taking a break. The young man also noticed. He was of the same opinion. It really was worth resting. The blacksmith refused the persuasion. He was fine. He had enough strength for something like this. He was eager to learn something new from the young master. He sat with a sullen face, but the assistant said with a smile that the man really loved swords. The other apprentices watched with interest, curious to know whether the new man was also an apprentice or not. They concluded that the master would teach the newcomer. For all the help provided, the guys were more and more surprised. It seemed that those two were having a lot of fun with each other. The boys realized with sadness that Barabbas was no longer the same man who had once instructed them. The former master had brought a stranger and was now having fun with him. Wilson watched from the sidelines. The guy thought that the old man should leave since he had already taken the step. But if he continued to appear in the workshop often, it would sow doubts about who the real master was there. The old friend stood on the edge of the cliff. Looking into the distance, Gerhard asked his comrade about his thoughts on Lutz's skills, whether this experience had been useful. The man was pleased with the result. Everything became clear from his face. It was indeed an interesting technique, a world of swords where they are similar to each other, but not the same. There was no time for boredom in the life of a master. Gerhard couldn't believe that these were all the words of a man who had been sulking at everyone until recently, to which his friend asked him to shut up. The blacksmith was happy. Probably what happened was just that. He needed nothing to finish washing and then to flare up furiously. Perhaps it was hard, but nothing was wasted. The man raised his fist towards him, excited and jubilant. Now he had become one with heaven, earth, and God. He continued to laugh heartily. The friend did not share his feelings. He was indignant, because the master was so out of breath and whether he would be able to create a new sword as a result. The blacksmith assured that he would be able to make a better blade. However, according to Barabbas himself, Lutz would call himself the best. He is certainly self-confident, but in fact he was a man who continued to create irreplaceable swords. The old man thought that their entire company were fools, who thought that they could become heroes with just one bronze sword. Gerhard suggested that when everything was over, they should visit the graves of their dead friends, but the master was surprised, since they didn't have graves. He joked that he planned to go to the labyrinth and lay flowers, but the old man did not object. Their squabble began to escalate. The blacksmith took into account the complexity of the labyrinth, and that he would not reach its depth. His friend had a different opinion. After all, they had already passed it once. But there was no certainty that old people like them could do it. Barabbas believed that if he threw his homemade sword into the treasure chest, it would be better than the bronze one. Gerhard asked not to make him too good, otherwise he would later regret parting. His comrades snorted and laughed loudly. The man was holding an ancient-looking object. What was supposed to be a katana had turned into a piece of burnt iron. The smell was simply unbearable. The blacksmith understood that he shouldn't show this work to Gerhard. He would definitely laugh at it, and his dead friends would appear as ghosts. The master's mood fell. He looked sadly at his failed katana and understood that it and the sword were different things. Could it be that his 40 years of experience were useless? He looked at the pieces of iron in the wooden bucket and took one piece closer. He became confident that he couldn't give up what he had started. He would try again and again until he succeeded, and he diligently took up the task. The apprentices only looked at him from the side. Perhaps the young masters were even angry that the former boss was doing something new, and even forging with pleasure. The work continued, and again something appeared that looked not like a katana but an iron rod. The next attempt was also unsuccessful, and it seemed to have the desired shape, but later this product also split in half. Lutz thought about a way to prevent the split. He spoke, and the blacksmith diligently wrote down, trying not to miss a word. Day followed night, and finally it was possible to look at the result. The master sighed. He was sweating quite profusely out of habit. The katana turned out to be quite presentable. Such work was enough for a beginner, but it would be possible to chop down goblins. The man was pleased with himself. Seeing his reflection on the blade, he remembered the time when he forged a sword himself. For the first time, the master was so happy, as if he had created something legendary. He wanted to create such a weapon with his own hands. Barubus even jokingly wanted to put his katanas in all the boxes. It was still better than bronze swords. He decided not to tell Gert. After all, the blacksmith himself had worked with the staff for decades, and should also be able to make a good katana. He already needed to take a break, but the master decided to direct all his ardor into the matter and immediately take on the fifth. Again, blows were heard on iron. The old master was actively working in the workshop. Some more time of hard work passed, and finally it began to seem to him that he could hear the breathing of iron. The form it wanted to take and the image of the katana that Barubus wanted to create matched perfectly. He was filled with a premonition that a masterpiece would be born. He wanted to see the shine of the blade and the final result, to see the amazing sharpness. The man was not distracted by anything. He felt at peace. Perhaps this was happiness. And suddenly blood flowed from his mouth. The blacksmith began to cough. This process seemed so amazing to him that his heart was ready to jump out of his chest. It really was beating hard, and the blood was becoming more and more. The blacksmith promised Gerhard that he would soon see what they so desired to find. Barubus himself would create it with his own hands. But the legend was not destined to happen. He raised the hammer for one more blow, but could not withstand it any longer. The man began to fall backwards, and that was the end of his journey. Many people came to see off the former master, both friends and former apprentices. The old man heard whispers behind him. People were discussing that the blacksmith had died while working, and in the morning he had been found by an apprentice who had come to the workshop. The girl brought flowers to Barubus to honor his memory. The man rested peacefully in his coffin. Although his parents did not want it, he remained a blacksmith until the very end. Flowers were released into the river. As tradition dictated, the man had died forging a blade. The assistant prayed quietly, while Gerhard and Lutz looked at the water. The young man was handed a long bundle, which surprised him. The old man said that when our Borubisa, he had a katana in his hands. This fool never finished the blade. He needed to stop, but he was too obsessed. The man asked the blacksmith, handing him the weapon, if he could finish what he had started. The guy was surprised. Why him, if the work was the master's? In general, he agreed with him. The student also did not accept the katana. He did not understand anything about them, so the old man could use it as he wanted. Even the deceased himself was not particularly good with such a weapon. The old blacksmith wanted with all his heart to see the job through to the end, but it didn't work out, and partly it was his fault. Lutz took the package, Mr. Gerhard. After all, I had entrusted it to the master, and everything that happened was the result of his way of life as a blacksmith. The young man took on the task of finishing the work. He had an important task ahead of him because it was the work of his life. The young man was surprised to discover that the blade was already 80% complete. All that remained was hardening and polishing. They say that the order determines the sharpness of the blade. If you lubricate it with oil and lower it, the blade will crack. This is a complex process, but there was no room for error here. The master lowered the blade into water. If the blade is not polished, it is difficult to understand whether it is good or bad, but the blacksmith's feelings told him he was sure. Barubus had not given his life. For this in vain, the master began polishing. This is definitely a masterpiece I received. When the blacksmith finished his work, he presented the katana to Gerhard, confident that everything was ready. He also wanted to give the weapon a name. The girl suggested the name Itetsu, and her interlocutors asked her what it meant. She explained that the designation was the saying, "A sword that thirsts for power, forged by a man who also thirsts for power." The old man held the weapon confidently, looking at Itetsu with good nature. He liked it and promised his friend that he would now always use it as his favorite sword. The blade turned out to be heavy. The craftsman made it too long. The old man imagined how his friend would laugh at his problem and suggest that he lighten the sword and make it shorter. He brushed his thoughts aside, as if telling the image to shut up, since the weapon was already completely his. The old man will never allow it to be shortened. His body just needs to get used to the blade. Gerhard was wondering where he could find a suitable place for training. A rock appeared on his way. He was surprised and decided to continue searching in another place. The man again saw the image of the blacksmith. Boroubus challenged him to show the full power of his itetsu. He took a deep breath, dropped his bag, and accepted the challenge. A sword is not a tool for cutting stones. He only had 3 words in his mind: useless, meaningless, and careless. The man was too clumsy to wield a katana. He swung his sword and intended to show off his abilities. He managed to cut the rock, but the blade remained intact. The old man was simply delighted. It turned out to be a magnificent sword. Gerhardt even felt like he had grown younger. It was the best result he had ever shown. The man proudly raised his weapon. Now it was his favorite sword, the legendary sword. The man hopefully believed that Boroubus had seen everything.